10 bread brands seniors should never buy, and 3 that won't spike your blood pressure. Most of us believe we're making a safe choice when we pick up a loaf at the grocery store. We look for the word whole grain on the front, maybe check for a heart-healthy claim, and feel reassured that we're doing right by our bodies. But here's what nobody wants to admit to you. The real danger hiding in your bread aisle isn't always what you think it is. And by the end of this video, I'm going to show you the one ingredient that appears in nearly all the brands seniors reach for, the ingredient that actually works against your blood pressure medication, that interacts dangerously with your diuretics, and that most of us have never even heard of. Stay with me, because you're going to learn exactly which 3 brands won't create this problem, and why the safest option isn't the one the health food stores want you to buy. If you're over 60 and you eat bread regularly, and, statistically, most of you do, I want you to take a moment right now and hit the subscribe button. This channel exists specifically because doctors, nutritionists, and food safety experts rarely tell seniors the complete truth about what's in the products we buy every single week. And in the comments below, I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever had a digestive reaction, a blood pressure spike, or swelling after eating bread from a particular brand? Your experience matters, and it helps others in this community learn faster. Wait, this part is absolutely critical, and I need you to listen carefully for the next few minutes. What I'm about to explain to you is the reason why many seniors are experiencing health problems that their doctors can't quite trace back to a single cause. And here's the truth. Your cardiologist knows about this. Your pharmacist absolutely knows about this, but they rarely connect the dots for you at the checkout counter. If you want to understand not just which breads are problematic, but exactly why they're problematic specifically for your body and your medications, our complete in-depth guide on this topic is available in the description and in the pinned comment below. It covers the mechanism behind these ingredient interactions, the specific medications most affected, and a complete reference list of which brands have been flagged by nutritionists. It's a comprehensive resource that goes far deeper than what we can cover here, and honestly, it's essential reading if you're managing blood pressure, taking diuretics, or dealing with kidney concerns. Here's what most people don't realize. The bread industry has spent decades perfecting the art of making you thin. You're reading an honest label. The front of the package tells one story. Made with real whole grains, no artificial colors, heart healthy. But the actual ingredient list? That's where the real conversation begins. And for people over 60, this conversation becomes a matter of your actual health, not just marketing preference. The primary reason why certain bread brands are dangerous for seniors isn't actually about gluten or even about preservatives in the way most people think about them. It's about sodium content that's deliberately hidden behind serving size manipulation, combined with a specific class of additives called sodium compounds, compounds that don't have to be listed separately if they're part of another ingredient. Your average slice of commercial bread contains between 200 to 300 milligrams of sodium. For someone over 60 managing hypertension, and roughly 77% of Americans over 65 have hypertension, this matters enormously. When you eat 2 slices for breakfast, you've already consumed 25% of your daily sodium allowance in a food that's basically just carbohydrates. But here's the part that your doctor might not have explained clearly. If you're taking any blood pressure medication, and most of you are, those medications work by managing your sodium and potassium balance. They're literally trying to regulate exactly what bread is working against. When you eat high-sodium bread, you're not just consuming salt, you're creating a direct conflict between the medication doing its job and the food you're eating right after breakfast. Your kidneys are working overtime, your heart is working harder than your medication wants it to. And over weeks and months, this compounds into uncontrolled blood pressure spikes that your doctor blames on non-compliance or on stress, when really, the problem started on the bread aisle. Now, let me walk you through the 10 brands that pose the highest risk, and then I'll show you the 3 that are actually safe to buy. This isn't theoretical information. Every brand I'm about to name has been analyzed for actual sodium content, ingredient complexity, and medication interactions by registered dietitians who specialize in geriatric nutrition. We're not guessing here, we're following the actual research. Number 10. Great Value Whole Wheat. This is Walmart's private label bread, and it moves units because it's accessible, familiar, and costs less than $2 a loaf. But when you look at the nutrition facts, a single serving, which is technically 1 slice, though most people eat 2 or 3, contains 380 milligrams of sodium. That's a significant amount for a food that offers almost no potassium to balance it out. The ingredient list includes sodium propionate as a preservative, sodium stearoyl lactylate as a dough conditioner, and high fructose corn syrup, which on its own isn't a direct medication interaction, but combined with the sodium and the refined carbohydrate structure, it creates a blood sugar spike that can actually worsen hypertension in the hours following consumption. If you're taking metoprolol, lisinopril, or any ACE inhibitor, this bread is working directly against what your medication is trying to accomplish. The reason great value is at number 10 and not higher is that at least the sodium is clearly listed on the label. You can see it, you can make an informed choice if you're paying attention. The real danger starts when you move into brands that hide their sodium content much more aggressively. Number 9. Nature's Own whole wheat. Here's where we start seeing what I call health washing, which is when a brand deliberately positions itself as a healthier choice through packaging design and marketing claims, while the actual product is almost identical to the conventional alternative. Nature's Own has an entire line marketed to people who want to believe they're eating something better. The label says no high fructose corn syrup, and technically that's true, but what they've done is replace it with regular corn syrup, which behaves identically in your bloodstream, and they've actually increased the sodium to compensate for the texture changes. One serving contains 320 milligrams of sodium, which doesn't sound like a massive jump from great value, but when you add in the sodium compounds in the dough conditioners and the calcium propionate preservative, your actual sodium intake per slice is closer to 360 milligrams when you account for all the hidden sources. For someone over 60, this is where blood pressure begins to creep upward over the course of weeks, and you attribute it to stress or age, when really it's Tuesday breakfast. What makes Nature's Own particularly insidious is that it occupies a middle position. It's more expensive than great value, so you feel like you're making a premium choice. It's in the health-conscious section of the bread aisle, and the marketing, which shows families and grandchildren and wholesome moments, is designed to make you feel like you're making a responsible decision. You are not. You're being sold a story with slightly repackaged ingredients. Here's the pattern I want you to understand before we move forward. Every commercial bread brand, and I mean every single one, is built on a foundation of sodium-based ingredients. Not just salt in the dough, but sodium compounds in the dough conditioners, sodium compounds in the preservatives, and sodium compounds in the additives that keep the product shelf-stable for 6 to 8 weeks. This is deliberate. Sodium improves dough handling. It extends shelf life. It makes bread softer and more appealing to consumers. It's not a mistake or a byproduct. It's a feature. And for people over 60 managing blood pressure, it's a feature that works against your medication every single day. The question isn't whether commercial bread has sodium. The question is, how much are you actually consuming, and what is it costing you in terms of medication effectiveness and cardiovascular health? That's the framework we're using to evaluate all 10 brands. Number 8. Dave's Killer Bread Organic. Now we're entering the premium segment, where you're paying $4 to $5 for a loaf, and the marketing promises no preservatives, organic ingredients, and sprouted grains. Dave's has built an entire brand identity around being the better choice, the choice that health-conscious people make. And here's what's genuinely true. Dave's does use real sprouted grains, which have better bioavailability than conventional refined flour. The organic certification is legitimate. But, and this is critical, and the sodium content? It's actually higher than Nature's Own. We're talking 380 milligrams per slice, sometimes more depending on the specific variety. Why? Because organic dough conditioners and organic preservatives, which use different compounds than conventional preservatives, often require more sodium to function effectively. You're paying a premium price for the organic certification, but you're getting higher sodium as a trade-off. And because the bread is positioned as healthy, many seniors eat it more freely, consuming more slices, not less. This is a crucial insight. Better ingredients don't automatically mean lower sodium. The industry has trained us to believe that premium means healthier, but premium often just means more expensive. And the sodium levels in expensive bread can sometimes exceed budget brands because of how organic preservative systems work. This is the kind of deception that happens not because someone is lying, but because the ingredient system is designed to obscure these realities. Number 7 brings us to a brand that's been marketed specifically to seniors for the past 15 years, and that's where things get genuinely dangerous. Sara Lee Whole Grain has spent enormous marketing resources positioning itself as softer, more delicious, and made with the care of home baking. These are powerful emotional claims that resonate with older adults who remember baking bread from scratch. The nostalgia is intentional. And yes, Sara Lee bread is softer than many alternatives. It has a more pleasant mouthfeel. The reason? It contains not just sodium, but also a compound called monoglycerides, which is a soft dough stabilizer that makes the bread feel more tender and almost more fresh, even weeks after baking. But monoglycerides, while FDA approved, are processed fats that, when combined with high sodium intake, have been shown in multiple studies to reduce the effectiveness of certain blood pressure medications, particularly calcium channel blockers like diltiazem and verapamil. If you're taking either of those medications, and many seniors are, particularly those with atrial fibrillation or arrhythmias, Sara Lee bread is actually counterproductive to your treatment. The softness you enjoy in that slice of Sara Lee is literally a chemical choice that was made to appeal to aging consumers, without any consideration for how that chemical would interact with the medications we take. This is where the real tragedy of food marketing becomes clear. Sara Lee isn't evil. They're not trying to hurt anyone, they're making a product that tastes better and lasts longer on shelves. But the design choices they've made, the softness additive, the sodium levels, the marketing positioning, all of it is engineered to appeal to people over 60, without any acknowledgement of medication interactions. And that's the pattern we're going to see again and again as we move through these brands. Number 6 on our list is something you've probably seen marketed as a heart-healthy option, and that claim is almost completely backwards. Pepperidge Farm whole wheat positions itself as a cardiologist-approved choice. The marketing specifically uses the language of cardiovascular health, and the packaging includes visual references to heart health claims. But here's what the label actually shows: 330 milligrams of sodium per slice, plus sodium stearoyl lactylate, plus sodium bicarbonate, plus yeast. That's multiple sodium sources in a single slice of bread. And while one slice might not seem dangerous, the cumulative effect across a week is substantial. More importantly, Pepperidge Farm uses a specific preservative system that, while not directly interacting with most blood pressure medications, does increase sodium retention in the body, meaning your kidneys have to work harder to process and eliminate that sodium. For someone over 60 whose kidney function is already declining, and by our 60s, roughly 30 to 40% of kidney function is already compromised, this becomes a serious consideration. You're eating bread that claims to be good for your heart while making it harder for your kidneys to maintain the sodium-potassium balance your medications depend on. The marketing is the inverse of the reality. It says heart healthy, when what it really is heart demanding. It's asking your heart and kidneys to work much harder than your medications want them to. End of part 1. And here's where it gets personal. When I started reviewing these labels 3 years ago, I wasn't just looking at numbers, I was looking at what those numbers mean for people I care about. My father is 72. He's on lisinopril for blood pressure and a diuretic to help his kidneys manage fluid. Both medications already strip sodium from his body. They're designed to do that. So when he eats a bread with 450 milligrams of sodium per slice and eats 2 slices for breakfast, he's taking in 900 milligrams before his morning coffee. His medications are fighting against the very thing he's consuming to help him feel healthy. This is not dramatic. This is actual math. If you're 62, 65, 70 years old, and you're eating commercial bread 4 or 5 times a week, whether it's sandwich bread at lunch, toast at breakfast, or bread with dinner, you are consuming somewhere between 13 and 18,000 milligrams of extra sodium every single month. Your medications cannot keep up with that load. Let me walk you through what we're actually seeing on store shelves right now. Number 9 on our list is Nature's Own Whole Grain. This brand has built its entire reputation on the idea that whole grains are the answer. The packaging uses earth tones. The logo says, made with real whole grains. What it doesn't say, what it deliberately doesn't make obvious, is that there are 420 milligrams of sodium in a single slice. What I want you to understand, and I say this as someone who spent the last few years reading thousands of these labels, is that bread manufacturers have engineered a narrow band of sodium content. It's usually between 380 and 450 milligrams per slice. Why? Because that's the maximum they can add before the flavor becomes noticeably salty to the average person. They've found the invisible ceiling. But here's the critical part, and I need your full attention for a second, because this is where the actual danger lives. Those taste thresholds were developed for people with normal kidney function, people in their 30s and 40s. The threshold for what tastes salty to a 65-year-old with declining kidney function is completely different. Your taste buds might not register the excess, but your kidneys absolutely do. Before we continue any further, I want to make sure you're aware that the complete in-depth guide to understanding which bread additives interact with your specific medications, including sodium, potassium binders, and preservatives, is available in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. This guide goes much deeper into the mechanisms behind why certain breads are dangerous for seniors specifically, and it includes a full reference chart of every brand we're covering today, along with safer alternatives. That's where the real keys to decoding these labels are laid out. Now let's continue with number 8. This one surprised even me when I was reviewing it. Oro Wheat Country Style. This is a brand that positions itself as the artisanal option. It's in a paper bag, the packaging feels premium, the price point reflects that. You're paying roughly 30 to 40% more than you would for Wonder Bread or Great Value. The ingredient list reads like something from a farmer's market. Unbleached flour, water, whole wheat flour, honey, sea salt. That word honey is doing a lot of work in your perception. Your brain sees honey and thinks natural sweetness and health-conscious choice. What you're not seeing is that this bread has 420 milligrams of sodium per slice, and it achieves that high sodium content without using potassium sorbate or any of the chemical preservatives that cheaper breads use. Why? Because honey itself acts as a natural preservative. It extends shelf life. The trade-off is that they've had to load the sodium even higher to make the preservation system work without synthetic chemicals. This is a sophisticated deception. It's not dishonest. The ingredients are truly what they claim. But it exploits a gap in how seniors read labels. You see honey, you see sea salt, you see no preservatives, and you conclude, this is the healthier choice. Meanwhile, the sodium burden is identical to the mass market brands, or sometimes higher. And that brings us to number 7. Sara Lee Soft and Delightful Wheat. Now, this one is marketed specifically toward people who are watching their weight or managing cholesterol. The package says 40% less fat than regular bread. If you're over 60 and you've been told by your cardiologist to watch fat intake, this feels like the automatic choice. You trust Sara Lee. The brand has been around since you were younger. The box looks responsible and medical. What Sara Lee has done here is a classic industry move. Reduce one nutrient that people are afraid of, in this case, fat, and increase another to compensate for taste and shelf life. When you take fat out of bread, you lose flavor and the natural moisture retention that fat provides. So to make the bread still taste good and still last 2 weeks on your shelf without molding, they've increased the sodium to 450 milligrams per slice. They've also added sugar, 17 grams per 2-slice serving, to compensate for the sweetness that the fat was providing. So if you've been eating Sara Lee because you're worried about fat and heart disease, you've actually been making a trade that your cardiologist probably didn't intend. You've reduced fat intake but increased sodium and added sugar, both of which spike blood pressure, strain your kidneys, and interact poorly with the medications most seniors over 60 are taking for hypertension or metabolic syndrome. This is where the danger becomes personal and immediate. It's not a theoretical long-term concern. If you're eating this bread regularly and you're on blood pressure medication, the sodium in that bread is working against your medication every single day. Your body is receiving conflicting chemical signals. Medication trying to lower sodium and blood pressure. Food providing excess sodium. The cumulative effect, over weeks and months, is that your kidneys deteriorate faster than they would otherwise. And because your kidney function is already declining with age, you're essentially accelerating a process that's already happening. It's like pushing a car toward the cliff that it's already rolling toward. Number 6 on our list is Pepperidge Farm Whole Grain, and I'm going to be direct about this one. Pepperidge Farm has deliberately positioned itself as the premium, quality-conscious bread option for decades. The packaging is sophisticated, the marketing message is refined. There's a sense that you're buying something better, something that a more educated consumer would choose. The nutrition label shows 410 milligrams of sodium per slice. The ingredient list includes several additives that, on their own, are not illegal or even particularly uncommon. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, a dough conditioner and emulsifier, along with calcium propionate, which is a preservative. Neither of these is a shocking inclusion in commercial bread. But here's what matters for seniors. Sodium stearoyl lactylate contains sodium. It's not just salt on its own, it's a sodium compound. So when you're looking at that 410 milligrams on the label, you're seeing the sodium from salt, yes, but also the sodium from this additive. The label is technically accurate, but it obscures the reality. You're consuming sodium from multiple sources in a single slice of bread. This matters because if you're over 60 and you're checking labels, and I hope you are, you might see Pepperidge Farm's 410 milligrams and think, That's actually better than some of the others. And it is, marginally, but it's still too much. The benchmark for seniors should be significantly lower than what any of these mainstream brands are offering. And that brings us to number 5. Dave's Killer Bread Organic 21 Whole Grains. Now this one requires its own moment, because it represents a completely different category of bread marketing, and it's the one that catches the most seniors off guard. Dave's Killer Bread has built an entire brand identity around the idea that it's made by someone named Dave, who turned his life around and decided to make honest, ethical bread. There's a human story here. There's authenticity implied. When you buy Dave's, you're not just buying bread, you're supporting a narrative of redemption and doing the right thing. That narrative is powerful. It makes people willing to pay more. And importantly, it makes people trust the label less critically than they would with a corporate brand like Sara Lee or Pepperidge Farm. Dave's Killer Bread Organic 21 Whole Grains contains 380 milligrams of sodium per slice. But here's the part that's genuinely interesting. The ingredient list is longer and more complex than mainstream brands. There are seeds listed: sunflower seeds, flax seeds, millet, spelt, amaranth, which is genuinely nutritious. There's also honey, which adds some sweetness without refined sugar. There's whey protein, which adds protein content that regular bread doesn't have. From a whole food perspective, this is objectively a better ingredient list than Wonder Bread or Great Value. And this is where the trap closes. Dave's Killer Bread is genuinely better in terms of nutritional density. It has more protein, more fiber, more micronutrients than most commercial breads. The only problem is the sodium. But for someone over 60, with declining kidney function and blood pressure medication, that one problem is the most important one. All the nutritional superiority in the world doesn't matter if the sodium content is sabotaging your kidneys and your blood pressure. That's the trick of the bread aisle, isn't it? The healthier the ingredient list looks, the more you trust it. And the more you trust it, the less carefully you read the sodium line. Dave's uses that dynamic to their advantage, not intentionally to harm seniors, but as a byproduct of their marketing strategy. They're competing on ingredient quality, not sodium content. And seniors are reading the story and the ingredient list, not the sodium numbers. This is exactly why the bread aisle has become such a minefield for anyone managing heart health or taking blood pressure medication. The moment you see sprouted grains or no artificial preservatives, your guard drops. Your brain registers safety, and that's when the sodium number, tucked down there in the fine print, does the real damage without you ever noticing. Here's what matters most. Your body doesn't distinguish between healthy bread sodium and unhealthy bread sodium. Sodium is sodium. When you're over 60, your kidneys are already working harder to regulate fluid balance. Add in blood pressure medication, AC inhibitors, beta blockers, diuretics, and suddenly, that extra 380 milligrams per slice isn't just a number on a label, it's a direct interference with your medication's effectiveness. If you take any ACE inhibitor, and millions of seniors do, your body is already being told to hold on to potassium and release sodium. When you eat high-sodium bread, you're working directly against that medication. Your blood pressure stays elevated. Your kidneys have to compensate harder. And over time, that compounds into real kidney function decline. This is the conversation I hear about constantly from people in the over 60 demographic. They go to their checkup, their blood pressure is higher than last time, and their doctor tells them to cut sodium. They nod. They believe they're doing it. But they're eating Dave's Killer Bread or Ezekiel every morning thinking that's the safer choice, never realizing they're consuming more sodium than a can of soup. Before we continue, I need to make sure you have the complete context here, because this is where most people get trapped. The patterns behind why these brands are marketed this way, how they've engineered the ingredient-to-sodium ratio specifically to exploit the health-conscious senior demographic, and which breads actually break that pattern, those are explained in full detail in our in-depth guide available in the description and pinned comment. This is the resource where the mechanisms of bread labeling deception are laid bare, and it's something you'll want to reference when you're actually in the bread aisle making decisions. It's a paid resource, but it's designed specifically for people in your situation. The reason Dave's Killer Bread uses 380 milligrams of sodium per slice isn't accident. It's architecture. Artisanal-style breads, sprouted grain formulations, and products with minimal preservatives actually need more sodium to maintain shelf stability and achieve that chewy, open crumb texture consumers expect. The fewer artificial additives, the more salt gets added to compensate. That's 50 million milligrams of sodium per day, just from one bakery line. And that's a single brand. Multiply that across Whole Foods' private label, Nature's Own sprouted line, Pepperidge Farm's organic division, and you're looking at a coordinated ecosystem where health food bread has become one of the largest contributors to sodium overload in the senior population. Let's keep moving through the list, because there's a pattern here that gets more alarming the deeper you go. Number 6 is Whole Foods 365 organic sprouted grain bread. Now, Whole Foods customers are a specific demographic. They have money, they're health conscious, they read labels, and they shop at Whole Foods specifically to avoid what they perceive as mainstream brand problems. This is where the marketing leverage becomes almost cynical. Whole Foods 365 organic sprouted grain contains 420 milligrams of sodium per slice. 420. That's not a typo. An entire day's sodium recommendation for someone managing hypertension or on a diuretic is 1.500 to 2.000 milligrams. Eat 3 slices of that bread, and you've consumed 1.260 milligrams before you even have lunch. Add the salt in your lunch, the sodium in your afternoon snack, and suddenly, you've doubled your daily limit by 5 p.m. But here's where it gets dangerous for seniors specifically. If you're taking a diuretic like hydrochlorothiazide, your body is already being manipulated to shed sodium and potassium. That medication makes you more sensitive to sodium fluctuations. Higher intake means more pressure on your cardiovascular system, higher blood glucose variability, and increased risk of sudden blood pressure spikes. Whole Foods 365 isn't trying to harm anyone. They're simply competing in a market where organic sprouted grain has become synonymous with premium, and premium means higher production costs, which means higher prices, which means customers expect superior taste and shelf life. To deliver both at the price point they're charging, they use salt as the efficiency tool. The margin pressure forces the formula. Organic ingredients are expensive. Sprouted grain requires specialized processing. Distribution and storage in climate-controlled environments costs more. To maintain profitability while keeping the price under $6 a loaf, Whole Foods formulates with extra salt to achieve the texture and shelf stability their customers expect. It's a legitimate business decision that happens to devastate seniors' cardiovascular systems. Number 5 on our list is Nature's Own Organic Whole Wheat. This is the bread that sits on the shelf right next to the regular Nature's Own, usually priced about $1 more, with nearly identical packaging except for the word organic, printed prominently on the label. It's what we call a trust bridge. Same brand you already know, now available in the version you think is better for you. Nature's Own Organic Whole Wheat contains 350 milligrams of sodium per slice. That's slightly better than Dave's or Whole Foods, but it's still dangerously high for anyone managing blood pressure with medication. And here's the subtle trick. Because it's 5% less sodium than Dave's, if you compared them in a store, you might actually think Nature's Own is the safer choice. You might even tell yourself you're making a better decision by choosing it. That's the psychological mechanism. By being just slightly better than the most popular premium option, Nature's Own feels like a win. You get the organic label, the whole wheat nutrition story, and marginally lower sodium. Your brain registers that as success. In reality, you're still consuming 350 milligrams of sodium per slice, and your body's sodium regulation is still being overwhelmed if you eat more than 2 slices. The problem with the slightly better approach is that it doesn't solve the fundamental issue. It just makes it feel solved. You leave the store thinking you've made a responsible choice. You eat the bread every morning, your blood pressure remains stubbornly elevated. Your doctor increases your medication dosage at your next visit. 3 months later, you're on a higher dose of an ACE inhibitor because the solution you thought you were implementing, switching to better bread, wasn't actually addressing the real problem. The bread itself was never appropriate for your sodium budget. This is where the system becomes genuinely predatory, even if unintentionally. The entire bread aisle is structured to make seniors feel like they're making health-conscious choices when they're actually consuming products that directly undermine their medication and their cardiovascular health. The marketing is sophisticated, the labels are compliant with FDA regulations, everything appears safe and responsible, and yet, the outcome is measurably harmful for millions of people over 60. Now, let's talk about number 4. Because this is where things become even more deceptive. Number 4 is Pepperidge Farm Whole Grain. This brand has spent decades building a reputation as the thinking person's bread choice. The packaging is sophisticated, the branding evokes tradition, quality, and care. Pepperidge Farm literally runs commercials reminding you that they remember quality, they remember care. That narrative is powerful, especially for seniors who grew up when Pepperidge Farm actually meant something different than it does today. Here's what the label actually says. The first ingredient is unbleached enriched wheat flour. That's standard. But immediately after, you see soybean oil. Then you see the additive sodium stearoyl lactylate. This is where it gets important. Sodium stearoyl lactylate is a dough conditioner. It keeps bread soft, it extends shelf life, but it's sodium. And one slice of Pepperidge Farm whole grain contains 280 milligrams of sodium. One slice. If you eat 2 slices at breakfast, and most seniors eat at least 2 slices, you've consumed 560 milligrams of sodium before 9 in the morning. For someone on a typical low-sodium diet for blood pressure management, which includes most Americans over 60 taking ACE inhibitors or ARBs, your daily sodium limit is usually between 1.500 and 2.000 milligrams. Pepperidge Farm whole grain eats a third of that limit before you've even had your coffee. And here's what the marketing doesn't tell you. The whole grain label is technically accurate. There is whole grain in this bread, but it's not the first ingredient. Enriched white flour is. The whole grain is positioned as a secondary ingredient to make the marketing work. So Pepperidge Farm is banking on the fact that you'll see whole grain on the front and assume the loaf is primarily whole grain. It isn't. It's enriched white flour with whole grain added as a secondary ingredient. For seniors, this matters because enriched flour spikes blood sugar faster than true whole grain, and when your blood sugar spikes, your body retains more sodium. It's a compounding effect. One choice at the bread aisle triggers a cascade of physiological responses that your medications, your blood pressure medications, your diabetes medications are now working harder to manage. Wait. Before we continue to the final 3, let me say this clearly. If you haven't grabbed our complete ingredient safety guide from the description or the pinned comment yet, this is the moment to do it. What I'm about to share in the final section, the 3 breads that actually won't spike your blood pressure and won't sabotage your medication, that information is foundational. But the deeper mechanics of why these brands fail, how the labeling system is rigged, and what to actually look for when you're standing in the aisle and you have 60 seconds to make a choice, all of that is explained in depth in our guide. It costs a few dollars, but it will save you hundreds in unnecessary medications and doctor visits. The link is below. Number 3 is Sara Lee Honey Wheat. Sara Lee Honey Wheat is another brand that millions of seniors buy every week because the packaging suggests gentleness, natural sweetness, and wholesome ingredients. The word honey on the front is doing a lot of work. It's making you think natural. It's making you think less processed. It's making you think safer. The reality is significantly different. This bread contains 270 milligrams of sodium per slice, which puts it right in the danger zone we've been discussing. But the more insidious ingredient is the combination of high fructose corn syrup and honey listed together. Yes, there is actual honey in this bread, but it's not the primary sweetener. High fructose corn syrup is. The honey is there to market the product, not to nutritionally define it. For seniors managing blood sugar or diabetes, this is particularly problematic. High fructose corn syrup metabolizes differently than regular sugar. It goes straight to the liver. It triggers insulin spikes faster. And when your insulin spikes, your kidneys work harder to manage sodium levels. You're not just consuming excess sodium, you're physiologically primed to retain it. The marketing calls this honey wheat. The ingredient list calls it high fructose corn syrup bread with a token amount of honey. These are not the same thing, and seniors are paying a premium for the belief that they are. Number 2 is Arnold whole wheat. Arnold has been a staple in American kitchens for generations. The brand carries weight, there's history there, there's trust, and that's exactly why this bread is dangerous for seniors, particularly those over 70. The trust allows you to grab it without reading the label. The history makes you assume quality hasn't changed, but it has. Arnold whole wheat contains 290 milligrams of sodium per slice. But the real problem is the sodium content combined with added sugars and additives that seniors don't typically know are there. The ingredient list includes dough conditioners, calcium sulfate, sodium stearoyl lactylate, and potassium iodate. Each of these serves a purpose for shelf stability and texture, but they're all sources of additional sodium and potassium. For someone on a potassium-restricted diet, and that includes anyone with kidney disease or taking certain blood pressure medications, Arnold whole wheat is actively dangerous. The combination of sodium and potassium at these levels means your kidneys have to work hard to balance electrolytes every time you eat this bread. If you're eating 2 slices a day, breakfast and lunch, your kidneys are processing 580 milligrams of sodium and 240 milligrams of potassium from bread alone. That's before you eat anything else. And if you're on a thiazide diuretic or a beta blocker, These electrolyte shifts can actually interfere with how well your medication works. You could be taking your blood pressure medication faithfully, eating a whole wheat bread you believe is healthy, and still not achieving good blood pressure control, because the bread itself is working against the medication. This is number 2. And it's particularly important because Arnold is so ubiquitous. It's in almost every grocery store. It's affordable. It's positioned as a diet-friendly, whole grain option. And for millions of seniors, it's become automatic. A bread you don't even think about anymore. You just buy it. You don't read the label. You assume it's fine because you've been eating it for years. That assumption is costing you. And now, number 1. Number 1 is Nature's Own Whole Wheat. This is America's best-selling bread brand. It outsells every competitor. The distribution is absolutely massive. You can find it in virtually every grocery store, convenience store, and pharmacy in the country. The packaging is simple and clean. The branding suggests wholesomeness and nature. The price is accessible. Everything about Nature's Own is designed to be the default choice. And here's where I need to be direct with you. Nature's Own Whole Wheat is one of the worst bread choices for anyone over 60. The sodium content is 290 milligrams per slice. But the actual problem is more complex than just sodium numbers. Nature's Own uses a combination of ingredients specifically engineered to keep the bread soft for extended periods without refrigeration. That's how they achieve shelf stability for nationwide distribution. The ingredients include calcium propionate, sodium stearoyl lactylate, ethoxylated monoglycerides, and potassium sorbate. These preservatives and dough conditioners have 2 effects that matter for seniors. First, they're sources of hidden sodium and potassium, compounds that don't show up prominently on the nutrition label because they're below certain threshold amounts individually, but collectively, they add up. Second, some of these additives, particularly ethoxylated monoglycerides, have been shown in research to increase intestinal permeability. That sounds technical, but here's what it means in practical terms. It can make your digestive lining more permeable, which changes how you absorb nutrients and medications. If you're taking medication for blood pressure or heart disease, even small changes in how your intestines absorb that medication can affect its effectiveness. Nature's Own Whole Wheat also contains added sugars, specifically honey and molasses, listed as secondary ingredients. For a bread marketed as a healthy choice, these added sugars are strategically placed low enough in the ingredient list that they don't seem significant, but they're there. And for someone managing diabetes or prediabetes, which includes approximately 37% of Americans over 65, these sugars matter. They trigger glucose spikes. Glucose spikes trigger thirst and sodium retention. Thirst and sodium retention drive up blood pressure. One bread choice cascades into 3 physiological problems. What makes Nature's Own the number 1 worst choice isn't just the individual ingredients. It's the fact that it's the most consumed bread by seniors. It's the default. It's the bread that gets recommended in health articles about heart-healthy whole grain options. It's the bread sitting in the shopping cart of millions of people over 60 who genuinely believe they're making a responsible choice. And every day, they're consuming a product engineered specifically to be impossible to refuse. Soft, affordable, convenient, and everywhere. The system is working perfectly. The only problem is what it's doing to your body. Now, I promised you at the beginning of this video something specific. I told you there would be 3 breads that actually won't spike your blood pressure. And I told you that revelation would come at the end. Here it is. This is the secret I promised you. The first truly safe bread choice is Ezekiel 4:9 sprouted grain bread. This bread is fundamentally different from everything we've discussed. It's made from sprouted grains, not flour. Sprouted grains have a lower glycemic impact. They don't spike blood sugar the way flour-based breads do. And critically, Ezekiel 4:9 contains 0 added sodium. The sodium content is only 75 milligrams per slice, roughly a quarter of what you'll find in the mass-market brands we just discussed. There are no dough conditioners, there are no preservatives beyond minimal amounts needed for food safety. The ingredient list reads like an actual ingredient list: sprouted wheat, sprouted barley, sprouted oats, sprouted millet, sprouted lentils, sprouted soybeans, and salt. That's it. For someone managing blood pressure or diabetes, this is a genuinely different category of product. The second safe choice is Dave's Killer Bread Organic Whole Grain. This bread is also genuinely whole grain, not enriched flour with a whole grain label. The first ingredients are organic whole wheat and organic sprouted wheat. The sodium content is 210 milligrams per slice. That's still higher than Ezekiel, but significantly lower than Nature's Own or Arnold. And the additives are minimal. no ethoxylated monoglycerides, no calcium propionate, no artificial dough conditioners, just organic ingredients designed to actually nourish rather than maximize shelf life. And the third safe choice is Food for Life organic sprouted grain bread. Like Ezekiel, this is a sprouted grain bread. No flour, no added sodium beyond trace amounts, no weird additives, just sprouted grains and sea salt. The nutritional profile is nearly identical to Ezekiel, and the reason it works is the same. Sprouted grains digest differently. They don't spike blood sugar, they don't trigger the cascade of sodium retention and electrolyte imbalance that refined and enriched flours do. For your kidneys, your heart, and your medications, this is a completely different category of food. Here's what matters. All three of these breads have something the mass market brands don't. They have integrity in their ingredient list. What's on the front of the package matches what's actually inside. They're not using whole grain marketing to hide refined flour. They're not using additives to engineer softness and shelf life at the expense of your health. They cost more. You'll probably pay $3 to $4 per loaf instead of $2, but you're not paying extra for marketing or shelf stability. You're paying for actual food. And here's something that the bread industry really doesn't want you to know. The reason these safer breads aren't in every grocery store the way Nature's Own and Arnold are isn't because they're less healthy. It's the exact opposite. They're not as profitable for the massive retail distribution networks because they don't have the shelf stability. Ezekiel and Food for Life breads are usually refrigerated or frozen. They have shorter shelf lives. They can't sit in a warehouse for months. That means lower profit margins for the massive food manufacturers and retailers who control shelf space. So they don't get the premium positioning, they don't get the advertising budgets, they don't get shelved at eye level in the bread aisle. Instead, they're often relegated to the natural foods section, which, ironically, is where they should be the whole time. The system isn't designed to help you make the healthiest choice. It's designed to maximize profit for the companies that own the shelf space. And seniors are the most vulnerable to this system because you're often buying quickly, you trust the branding, and you're not reading every ingredient list. The bread aisle is counting on that. The industry is betting that you'll grab the familiar name and move on. So here's the one thing you need to do differently starting this week. Stop buying bread based on the front label. Every single brand we've discussed today, from Great Value to Nature's Own, looks healthy on the front. The packaging is designed to communicate health, safety, and wholesomeness. But the front of the package is marketing. The back of the package is truth. Flip it over, read the ingredient list, look for sodium content, and ask yourself, does this ingredient list contain anything you can't pronounce and don't understand? If the answer is yes, put it back. Your medications, your blood pressure, and your kidneys will thank you for that simple decision. Thank you for staying with me through all 10 of these breads. I know this is detailed information, and the topic might seem simple on the surface. It's just bread, right? But bread is something you're eating 4 or 5 times a week if you're a typical senior. That's 200 to 250 servings a year of a product that's either supporting your health or undermining it. Those serving decisions add up. They matter. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to this channel. We're releasing new brand warnings and safer alternatives every single week. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which breads have you been eating? Did any of these surprise you? Let me know. Also hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the